environmental science and public health. It is profoundly disturbing to see the actions this EPA has taken to dismantle many of its own standards and regulations that were established primarily to protect public health. This administration's push to deregulate seems to be led by political ideologies with limited input from scientific experts. Remarkably, sometimes this administration's zeal to roll back public health protection even exceeds the desires of industry. Many members of the regulated community have come out in opposition to EPA's recent actions to roll back regulations on glider trucks, methane emissions from the oil and gas industry, and EPA's unprecedented and ill-advised revocation of California's authority to set its own clean car standards. Since the establishment of the EPA nearly 50 years ago, this country has shown that we can protect everyone, from our most vulnerable populations to our most healthy, without sacrificing economic growth. But it is naive to think that because the EPA has been so successful in accomplishing its mission over the past decades, that we can now roll back regulations in order to benefit industry and expect no negative impacts on public health. Environmental protections is an ongoing process. It requires a persistence that is exemplified by the dedicated scientists and engineers who work at EPA. These committed public servants have the full support of the American people, but they need your full support, Mr. Administrator, as well as full support of Congress to help them to continue to carry out the agency's mission. Let me be clear, gutting the roles of science and EPA's regulatory and decision-making processes will not make our air safer to breathe or our water safer to drink. As a congressional committee with jurisdiction over research and development activities at EPA, my colleagues and I take our oversight role very seriously. We have attempted to engage with you and your staff on a number of occasions and issues that directly impact public health. We're still waiting for adequate responses from the agency on many of these inquiries. Simply stating the total number of pages of documents provided to the committee does not address whether they are responsive to the request. I hope this will not be the only time that we can see you before the committee, and today marks the start of an open dialogue between our members and yourself. We look forward to working together with you to ensure that the best interests of the American public are at the heart of EPA's actions, and that those actions are informed by the high caliber science that distinguishes EPA on the world stage. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Lucas, for opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson, and thank you, Administrator Wheeler, for being here today to discuss the EPA's fiscal year 2020 budget request. The EPA is charged with the broad and vital mission of protecting our nation's air, land, and water. From hazardous waste cleanup to protecting human health to setting clean air and water standards, the EPA's work affects every American. While much of the EPA's regulatory mission falls under the jurisdiction of other congressional committees, the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology oversees the EPA's work on environmental research and development. This R&D is critical to providing sound science needed for the EPA to effectively carry out their mission to protect our environment. I'm looking forward to a discussion about the role science and technology play in the agency's mission, and I'd like to encourage my colleagues to focus on the important jurisdiction when questioning the administrator. In my many years on both the Ag and Science committees, every discussion of the EPA included talk of overregulation. In the past, it seemed like instead of protecting the environment, the EPA was more focused on pursuing a political agenda that led to an expansive and, I might add, expensive regulatory burdens. Fortunately, this is no longer the case. Under the leadership of Administrator Wheeler, the EPA has shifted from top-down, one-size-fits-all regulations to a flexible, technology-driven approach that works with local communities to protect our environment and maintain economic growth. I'm confident that under the leadership of Administrator Wheeler, America will remain the gold standard of environmental protection around the world. And by leveraging new technologies, we can protect our environment without imposing sweeping government mandates. As the ranking member of the Science Committee, I may be biased, but I believe that technology should be the cornerstone of our efforts to reduce global emissions and address our environmental challenges. American industry is already making great strides by investing in technologies like carbon capture, advanced nuclear, and energy storage. EPA should encourage the adoption of innovative ways to monitor and reduce emissions, while allowing us to use all of our natural resources safely and effectively. This is the kind of approach that has helped significantly improve air quality in the United States. According to the EPA's most recent Air Trends report, the number of unhealthy air days, along with the emissions of key air pollutants, have declined since 2000. Our fine particulate matter levels are 5 times lower than the global average, and we've made progress while growing our economy. Under the Trump administration, I've been pleased to see the EPA focus on using sound, transparent science to develop environmental solutions that will bring all the stakeholders to the table. If we want our policies to be successful, they need to be based on the best available science and also be achievable without damaging our economy. I believe the administration is working hard on both. I also want to take a moment and applaud Administrator Wheeler for finalizing the first step to repeal the Obama administration's WOTUS rule this week. This rule was exactly the wrong way to protect the environment, a federal government power grab that made it harder for farmers, ranchers, and landowners to do business. By returning to limited regulatory authority established under the Clean Water Act, the EPA has taken a balanced approach that both supports our environment and our economy. But don't let anyone fool you. Rolling back this regulation had nothing to do with ignoring the science, and it won't lead to more pollution in our waterways. In fact, the Trump administration has prioritized efforts to improve water quality by investing in water infrastructure. Although the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act loan program and the State Revolving Funds program, the EPA has helped local communities modernize outdated infrastructure and improve water quality. This investment will improve the health and safety of our nation's waterways and create jobs. I'm sure that we'll hear criticisms of the EPA today. I hope that instead of falsely attacking the agency's anti-science or focusing on Administrator Wheeler's predecessor, we can make this a productive hearing where we honestly assess the work being done to protect the environment. I believe the EPA is on the right track and is working to find a science-based collaborative approach to ensure all Americans and future generations we can enjoy a cleaner, safer, healthier environment. I want to thank Administrator Wheeler again for his hard work, along with all of the staff at the EPA, and I look forward to hearing his testimony this morning. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. If there are other members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. Before we open, I want to welcome the Moms Clean Air Force and the audience in red T-shirts. Parents United Against Air Pollution, thank you for coming. At this time, I'd like to introduce our witness. The Honorable Andrew Wheeler currently serves as the 15th Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Mr. Wheeler has spent his career working on environmental topics, started his career as a Special Assistant to the EPA's Pollution Prevention and Toxics Office under the H.W. Bush administration. He spent 12 years on the Senate Committee of Environmental and Public Works, serving 6 of those years as Chief Counsel and Minority and Majority Staff Director. In 2009, Mr. Wheeler shifted to private sector work and was the principal and team leader of the Energy and Environment Practice Group, as well as co-chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Group at the Frager Baker Daniels Consulting. He was nominated to serve as the Deputy Administrator of the EPA in October 2017 and was confirmed as Administrator in February 2019. He earned his law degree at Washington University in St. Louis and his MBA at George Mason University. He's also an Eagle Scout. Administrator Wheeler, you will have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing. When you have completed your spoken testimony, we'll begin a round of questions. Each member will have 4 minutes to question the panel. Welcome, and you may begin your testimony.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairwoman Johnson, for the introduction. And I do agree, I hope today's hearing is the start of a good open dialogue with the committee, between myself and the committee and my staff. Thank you very much. Good morning, Ranking Member Lucas and members of the committee. The Environmental Protection Agency is one of the world's leading research organizations. Every day, our scientists and researchers develop information and technology that are critical to protecting human health and the environment. Since I've taken the lead at EPA, I've visited 5 of our research facilities and the Lake Guardian, our largest research vessel located on the Great Lakes. I am regularly briefed by agency scientists, and I rely on their work and expertise. I'm always impressed with the rigor, integrity, and dedication of our career scientists and staff. I'm here today to discuss the ways that we are supporting and advancing their efforts. We are promoting science at the agency more than it has been in years, and these efforts are leading to groundbreaking advancements in environmental science. Earlier this week, for example, we announced approximately $6 million in new funding to 8 leading research organizations to advance our understanding of PFAS. This is just one of the many ways that we are delivering on our PFAS action plan, the most comprehensive multimedia research and risk communication plan to address a chemical of concern ever issued by the EPA. Our scientists, working in concert with the Department of Defense, are providing the research and technology to support the action plan. They are developing methods to detect and quantify PFAS in the air, water, and soil. They are evaluating methods to treat or remove PFAS from drinking water. They developed a draft toxicity assessment for Gen X and PFBS, and they are working to understand the potential toxicity for the many other PFAS and their potential degradation products. EPA is one of the few places in the world where this type of cutting-edge science is being conducted day in and day out. We're also leading the way on research for reducing childhood lead exposure. Our scientists are identifying high-risk areas and providing technical assistance for reducing lead in drinking water and at contaminated sites. Their modeling efforts and research activities are directly impacting major regulatory decisions, such as our forthcoming proposal to update the lead and copper rule, the first major update in over 2 decades. And the same outstanding researchers who provided vital information to help Flint, Michigan, are now working with state and local officials in Newark, New Jersey, on their efforts to ensure safe drinking water for the city's residents. To support our scientists and researchers, we are continually looking for ways to make the agency more effective and more responsive. That is why we are restructuring the Office of Research and Development. We've briefed many of you and your staff on this reorganization, but I'd like to reiterate that it will help ORD better address the increasingly complex environmental challenges of the 21st century. It will not result in the loss of jobs. It does not change any of the important work ORD is tasked with, only how we manage those functions. And I'd like to remind you that this effort was led by EPA career staff. We plan to have the reorganization in place by October 1st. Earlier this month, we took another step in modernizing the agency by committing to aggressively reduce animal testing. This issue is very important to me personally. Advances in computer modeling and in vitro testing are surpassing animal testing, and we need to keep pace. I issued a memo that commits the agency to important goals, such as reducing mammal study requests and funding by 30% by 2025, and then eliminating all requests and funding by 2035. Any request for funding after 2035 will require the administrator's approval on a case-by-case basis. We also announced $4.25 million in funding to 5 research universities to advance the development of alternative test methods for evaluating the safety of chemicals that will minimize and hopefully eliminate the need for animal testing. Finally, we are committed to the highest quality science. Good science is science that can be replicated and independently validated, science that holds up to scrutiny. That is why we're moving forward to ensure that the science supporting agency decisions is transparent and available for evaluation by the public and stakeholders. I cut my teeth as a career employee at the agency working on the Community Right to Know Act. I fundamentally believe the more information we provide to the public, the better our regulations will be and the more they will trust our decisions. At the same time, we will ensure that we're not disclosing confidential or personal information. Other agencies already do that, and we can do the same. Our proposed rule will apply prospectively to final significant regulatory actions, and we intend to issue a supplemental proposed rule to our science transparency regulation early next year. I'm very proud of the science we do at the agency. As you all heard at a recent hearing, EPA has one of the strongest scientific integrity policies in the federal government. The GAO report recently examined our policies and those of 9 other agencies, and we are the only agency that received no recommendations to correct deficiencies. That is a testament to the tremendous work of the EPA career staff. I will continue to support them in their work, and we will ensure that the EPA of the 21st century remains a global leader in science and research. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. I'd like to ask now unanimous consent that Representative Axney be allowed to join us on the dais. And then further, I'd like to acknowledge and recognize Mr. Tonko for the first round of questions since he has to leave. Mr. Tonko.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate your flexibility, and welcome, Mr. Administrator. EPA established its scientific integrity policy in 2012 in order to formalize the agency's approach to honesty, communication, professional development, and expert engagement on scientific issues. As you likely know, the Government Accountability Office's review of scientific integrity policies at several federal agencies highlighted the EPA's robust scientific integrity policies. I would like to congratulate the EPA for its impressive scientific integrity policy, particularly as I work to pass the Scientific Integrity Act, which would codify, standardize, and strengthen scientific integrity policies across our federal agencies. I just heard your closing statement, but I want to ask again, until we can codify this requirement, can I expect your continued support for your agency's robust scientific integrity policies?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, sir. And chlorpyrifos is a pesticide that causes severe short and long-term health impacts. Agricultural workers have collapsed from exposure, nauseated and convulsing. Particularly horrifying are the impacts of chlorpyrifos on developing fetuses and young children. When EPA proposed in 2015 to ban the chemical, it cited studies showing that at 3 years old, the likelihood of highly exposed children developing mental delays were significantly greater than those with lower prenatal exposure. But just this past July, EPA announced it would allow chlorpyrifos back on the market. I have a series of questions that I would ask you respond to in yes or no fashion. In rolling back EPA's recommended ban on chlorpyrifos, did the agency consider its own findings about the severe health and developmental consequences for children and workers exposed to this pesticide, sir? Yes or no?
Our career staff looked aggressively at the science that we had.
That's yes. EPA previously stated that the agency's assessment contains sufficient evidence to conclude that negative neurodevelopmental effects from chlorpyrifos occur at exposure levels below the currently permitted level. Are you aware of the, yes or no, of the findings in this report, the EPA's revised human health risk assessment?
I'm aware of those, but we are currently reviewing the pesticide,
Okay.
and we're on
That's a
track
yes.
to review it by 2022.
Thank you. Did EPA base its decision to allow industrial use of chlorpyrifos on new, unrevealed scientific evidence that contradicted or discredited the agency's 2015 analysis? Yes or no?
I would have to get back to you on that because I want to make sure I don't misstate on the science that the career scientists used for that decision.
Please do so in rapid fashion. Did this specifically include the evidence of chlorpyrifos impairing the brain development of children and fetuses? Yes or no?
I can't comment on the specific studies that the career scientists used for their determination. I would want to, I don't want to misspeak.
Well, these are
On behalf of
important.
scientists. I
They're
understand,
important
but I take the
questions.
recommendations from my career scientists on chlorpyrifos, and they've recommended that we continue with it while they undergo the longer review.
Thank you, sir. I just want to use my time here. In 2017, your predecessor, Scott Pruitt, announced that EPA would delay the 2015 proposed ban on chlorpyrifos, citing regulatory certainty for industry as his reason. Mr. Wheeler, can you remind me the stated mission of EPA?
Our mission is to protect public health and the environment.
Thank you, sir. Is there anywhere the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act, FIFRA, where regulatory certainty for industry is named as an evaluation criteria for EPA's decision-making?
We try to provide regulatory certainty for everything that we do, certainty for the American public, certainty for the community.
So is it a yes or no?
Nothing specifically in that statute, but we tried to provide regulatory certainty for all of our decisions, and we try to make all of our decisions open and transparent for everybody to see what science.
So am I assuming that's a no?
I have to go back to remember what the wording of your exact question.
Well, is there anything within FIFRA where regulatory certainty for industry is named as an evaluation criteria?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
So it's a no. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lucas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I expect the theme of this hearing to be climate change, with particular criticism aimed at the President's decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle seem to believe that without international agreements, burdensome regulations, or trillions of dollars spent on the Green New Deal, it's impossible to protect the environment. But as I said in my opening statement, data tells us another story. The United States is a leader in reducing emissions, yet we remain one of the largest economies of the world. Administrator Wheeler, can you provide the committee with the progress the EPA has made to date in cleaning up air, water, and land, and what steps you plan to take to keep America as the gold standard of environmental protection around the world?
Absolutely. We are the gold standard. Everybody else in the world looks to us. The EPA measures 6 criteria air pollutants. We've done that since 1970. Those 6 criteria air pollutants have been reduced 74% since 1970. Our air is 74% cleaner. All 6 of the criteria air pollutants have been reduced during the Trump administration. In 1970, again, at that time on the water side, 40% of our water sources did not meet EPA's standards on a daily basis. Today, over 90% of our water supply meets the EPA standards every single day. That doesn't mean to say that the remaining don't meet the standards, but they occasionally may have a blip because of a contaminant, but we work with the states and local governments to make sure that those are very small, short-lasting, and that we get back to having clean, safe drinking water for everyone across the country.
Administrator, do you believe that we need a heavy-handed top-down approach to environmental regulation, or, based on the EPA's analysis, can a more flexible state-led program be just as effective in the long run?
It can be, and we are working more cooperatively with the states than the previous administration. The Obama administration on the air side issued 10 times as many federal implementation plans instead of state implementation plans as the 3 administrations previous combined. We have been turning those FIPs into SIPs on the average of 1 per month. We also inherited 700 SIP backlog. We've already reduced that backlog by 400. So we are working cooperatively with the states to make sure that they are protecting the environment of their residents.
Administrator, what about incorporating new technology? I've heard from my constituents that it can be difficult to demonstrate new technologies for emissions control, or monitoring to meet regulatory standards. Have you considered new ways to encourage the adoption of innovative technology solutions in your regulatory approach?
Yes, and that's part of what we based for our decision on methane. We want to make sure that we're not stifling technological developments in that industry. On natural gas, methane is natural gas. Natural gas has doubled in production since 1990. At the same time, the industry has reduced their methane emissions 15%. We want to make sure that we don't go forward with a regulation that is going to stifle innovative technologies that are capturing the methane emissions and making sure that we don't have those emissions.
Thank you, Administrator. Yield back the balance of my time, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you. Mr. Wheeler, in June, you wrote to Congress that Mary Nichols of the California Air Resources Board was not negotiating in good faith with the EPA to reach a compromise on vehicle fuel emission and tailpipe standards, and that she was lying when she told members of Congress in the Energy and Commerce Committee that she'd made a sincere counter-proposal. But it's my understanding that the counteroffer that the CARB made is essentially the voluntary agreement that was reached with the automakers earlier this year, announced on July 25th. So it sounds to me like Ms. Nichols was telling the truth to the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I would like to ask unanimous consent Madam Chairperson, to put into the record an article from the LA Times about this issue. Mr. Wheeler, would you be willing to share the briefing materials prepared by EPA staff that analyzed California's offer to EPA? Would you be willing to share that with this committee?
I'd have to certainly share what we can with the committee. There may be deliberative documents involved in that. But I want to just make sure you understand the offer that Mary Nichols gave us last fall. She said at the time that, although she was putting it on the table, she said that the outgoing governor did not sign off on it, the incoming governor didn't sign off on it, the attorney general who already threatened to sue us didn't sign off on it.
Well, we are going to sue you.
Her board did not. Her members of her board hadn't signed off on it. And she also said that
If I may, my time is limited because what she offered is what the deal they basically made with the auto. And at the same day that they did that, the Department of Transportation indicated that the administration did not prevent manufacturers from building more efficient vehicles on a voluntary basis if they wanted to. So I think the threats that are being made by the administration are really contradicted by the Department of Transportation's comment at that time. I'd like to also note that Senator Feinstein has sent a letter to the Attorney General pointing out that I really think it's an abuse of power on the part of the Department of Justice to try and threaten automakers who are reaching an agreement with the state I represent to deter other automakers from entering the same deal, but they're not disagreeing that with the other deals that are being made. For example, rear seat reminder systems that are being made, and that's not being challenged as an antitrust violation. So I just want to express my concern not only about the decision that was made here. I mean, California had more than 100 waivers in the last 50 years by both Democratic and Republican presidents, and to achieve a standard that has made automobiles 99% cleaner than they would have been otherwise. The lawsuit that is going to be engaged in is going to you created chaos here because the automakers are not going to know what to do. This is going to be tied up in court for the foreseeable future, and I would hope that you would take a look at the chaos that has been created for clean air, but also in the auto industry by the actions that have been taken that are really unprecedented in the history of the Clean Air Act. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
It's important to remember that we're doing nothing to take away California's ability to set health-based standards for automobiles, only energy efficiency.
Thank you very much. Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator Wheeler, I'm extremely interested in that last exchange regarding Mary Nichols. You were enumerating everybody that basically hadn't signed off. Would you go back through that list again and explain why that was?
Certainly. What she put on the table was basically the Obama plan spaced out over one additional year. And she said that although she was putting it on the table for us, that the outgoing governor, and this was right around the election last year in California, the outgoing governor had not signed off on it. The incoming governor hadn't signed off on it. The attorney general, who already said he was suing us, had not signed off on the deal. And she is the executive director of CARB. She said that the board members of CARB had not signed off on it. So it really wasn't a deal. It wasn't really an offer that she could stand behind or that she had any authority, apparently, to make to us. I'd also point out that the deal that the Congresswoman mentioned with the four automakers, we haven't seen the specifics of that deal. Nothing has been released to the public, so I don't know if it's the same as what the CARB executive director put on the table last fall. I don't know if it's the same deal or not.
So you would say that's a pretty good example of not negotiating in good faith?
Yes, I would.
I would agree with that. I want to segue in and ask, Administrator Wheeler, are the comprehensive regulatory reforms you personally are undertaking at the EPA, which we appreciate, including policies by any change of any views on air and water science? Or are they instead driven by an effort to restore the statutory authority provided to the EPA via the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, as well as other statutes?
Both. We certainly use science in all of our regulatory decisions, but you're right. On the ACE rule, it replaced the Clean Power Plan, but the Clean Power Plan never took effect because the Supreme Court issued an historic stay which showed that it was outside of the bounds of the Clean Air Act. On WOTUS, as soon as the Obama administration went forward with their WOTUS proposal, it was stayed by courts around the country. It was only in effect in 22 states. 28 other states were not following the Obama WOTUS proposal, which is why we had to withdraw it so that we could have one regulation for the entire country. We didn't think a patchwork approach would be useful for WOTUS.
Well, we in Texas, particularly in my district, appreciate that. We really do. Despite the overall decline in the number of unhealthy air days since 2000, there was an uptick in the number of bad air days in some parts of the country last year. Is this because the EPA is rolling back environmental protections, or how do natural events, dust storms, wildfires, variations in weather affect and air quality concentration, affect air quality concentrations from year to year? How does that happen?
It's both. First of all, since 2000, we have strengthened the regulations. So, the regulatory determinations are tighter than they were. Plus, there are a lot of naturally occurring events around the country that contribute to bad air quality. I was in Alaska last month and saw the smoke from the fires firsthand outside of Anchorage. With the wildfires in California, that contributes significantly to poor air quality days across the West. Other fires do the same thing, which is why I really hope that the Forest Service, working with the states, can get a handle on these out-of-control wildfires, have more prescribed burns, try to clear out the underbrush so that we don't have these long-lasting fires that really are detrimental to public health.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Administrator and Madam Chair. Thank you, and I'm going to yield back.
Thank you very much. Let me welcome an additional attendance of members of the Clean Air Force. Welcome. Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator Wheeler, in 2016, researchers in the EPA's Office of Research and Development updated the Integrated Risk Information System, or IRIS, value for ethylene oxide, which is known as ETO. Mm-hmm. In doing so, they determined that cancer risk for inhalation of ETO was 30 times higher than previously thought. In August 2018, EPA scientists released the latest version of the National Air Toxics Assessment based on the new IRIS value. This revealed an elevated cancer risk in the communities around a commercial sterilization facility in Willowbrook, just outside my district, facility owned by Sterigenics. I not only represent families in the impacted communities, I also live there. Thanks to the state of Illinois, this plant is now closed, perhaps only temporarily. I've been calling on the EPA to act quickly to protect not only the families in these communities around Sterigenics, but those around ETO, facilities that use ETO for sterilization all around the country. We need the EPA to use the updated IRIS value for ETO to set a strong new federal emission standard that protects Americans all across our country from this dangerous carcinogen. I first wrote to you, then acting administrator, on September 21st, 2018, almost exactly 1 year ago. When will the EPA set a new standard for ETO to protect Americans all across our country?
We are working on 2 different rulemakings to address ETO, and both of those are in the works, but we have been working hand in hand with both the local government as well as the state. It was EPA that provided the monitors, the ambient air monitors, the modeling to determine what the impact was from Willowbrook. We worked with the state. They used our data to make the determinations that they did on that facility, and we worked with the facility to make sure that they were installing better technologies to capture the emissions so that it does not get into the neighborhood. There are a lot of issues around ETO.
Well, I want to make sure that, are you going to use the updated IRIS values? IRIS According to the EPA's website, it says IRIS assessments are the preferred source of toxicity information used by the EPA. And I want to make sure that you're committed to using this updated IRIS value for the cancer risk for ETO when developing this new standard. Are you committed to that?
We are using the IRIS assessment for our regulatory decisions. It's important to remember that the IRIS program is not a regulatory program. So we also have to make sure that we are following the regulatory requirements of the statutes, such as the Clean Air Act, that we are using to set the standards for that facility for ETO.
I just want to make sure that you're going to use that, because there's been some arguments against it, and it's critical that that science is not ignored.
We use all of our available science in making regulatory decisions, but again, the IRIS program is not a regulatory program.
I want to close by reiterating a request from my neighbors in Illinois who would appreciate your participation in an October 2nd town hall on ethylene oxide in Lake County. I firmly expect the EPA to do its job engaging with the public at this event. I appreciate the air monitoring around the facility in Willowbrook, but it is important that EPA set a standard to protect Americans from this dangerous cancer-causing chemical, and US EPA needs to act quickly and decisively on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. And I know you're also concerned about the Great Lakes. Last month, we announced first ever trash-free Great Lakes grant program to help get the Great Lakes cleaned up.
Thank you. Mr. Babin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Administrator Wheeler, thank you for being here. A few weeks ago, you commented on an often overlooked provision of the Clean Air Act, Section 115, an integral part of President Trump's decision to pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement. You said another aspect that a lot of people gloss over is that under the Clean Air Act, if we enter into an international treaty, such as the Paris Climate Accord, if we fail to meet our targets, those are enforceable under our domestic laws. While this issue gets very little attention, this seems like a very big deal to me. For example, we know that advisors to Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign supported invoking Section 115, but recommended against mentioning it during the campaign, because I imagine they thought that using an obscure provision to regulate the entire U.S. economy would not poll very well. I would like to enter into the record an article written by the Center for American Progress titled "How the Paris Agreement Supercharges the Clean Air Act." Madam Chair.
Without objection.
Thank you. Which details exactly how far those on the far left would use Paris to impose overreaching climate regulations across the U.S. economy. Can you please elaborate on this threat from Section 115 and how it might be used to circumvent the U.S. Congress?
Certainly. First, I do want to just clarify my remarks from a few weeks ago. I didn't mean to suggest that that was one of the primary reasons President Trump used for withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord. I actually wasn't with the administration at the time, so I did not brief the President on the Paris Climate Accord. I know he cited trade issues,
right,
as well as the fact that we were treated differently from China and India and other countries. But I completely agree with you that Section 115 could give, and I think the Center for American Progress paper on this is evidence of that there are certainly people that want to use that section of the Clean Air Act to allow third parties to sue the United States government if they fail to meet treaty obligations and force them to then meet the treaty obligations. And the Paris Climate Accord